My brother framed me of rope 8 years ago, but the truth has finally been revealed. In February 2016, I got into a major accident and spent a good part of 5 weeks in recovery. The staff told me that they contacted my emergency number, which was still Jenny at that point, and she hung up and no one showed. Once I recovered, I realized that I had spent a good part of my savings and I needed to get back on my feet, if not for anything else, to have a roof over my head. However, I realized that I won't be able to do anything in the place I was at. So I sold all my furniture, paid my remaining dues for the rented accommodation and decided to start from scratch in a different place. I moved to a city 2 hours away and tried to get a job, for some time but to no avail. I also used to drink myself silly and thoughts of offing myself were recurring. Waking up after seeing a nightmare to a cold sweat almost became a norm. For 4 months, this went by, after which I ran into an old acquaintance, James, from college. We greeted each other and talked about our lives for a bit. I told him I was in the city looking for a job. He told me he had just quit and was planning on setting up a management consulting firm of his own. He then invited me to a drink later on, where after a lot of talking about our professional lives, he offered me an opportunity to work with him as he needed a couple of people who knew their stuff. At this point I thought I needed to work my butt off to get my mind off these thoughts. So I agreed, but I told him I wanted to meet him and his team and talk to them before we moved forward. 2 days later, he introduced me to another guy, Derek, and told me that currently it will be just the 3 of us going forward. I shook hands with Derek and told them that before they proceeded further, I had something to say. I then proceeded to spill the beans on everything that had happened to me during that time and how I was disowned and divorced because of it, with the tears coming through in between. James and Derek told me that they felt sorry for me, but also told me that if there was no criminal record on my person, then there would be no issue. I stated that police never came to my house, and they were relieved. James did mention that to be on the safer side, he's going to ask someone to run a full background check, and I understood his position and agreed. During this time I was living in a run-down place that I rented to minimize my expenses. I waited patiently for 2 weeks but was still looking for jobs in other places in case things didn't work out. 2 weeks later, James called me and we met up later that day. He stated my record is clean of any rope, and welcomed me to the team. After that I threw myself to my work and started therapy sessions. On the advice of Derek, I also joined a gym and vented a lot of my frustration on the punching bag. Derek and I became gym brothers, and I basically looked at him as an older brother, as he was essentially my older brother Henry's age. By the end of 2018, I had a good amount of control back in my life, the consulting firm took off and the money rolled in. I rented out a nice apartment in a decent neighborhood. The Band-Aid also came off to an extent, and I realized I needed to do some necessary steps to move on. I went to a courthouse and changed my last name officially on record. I adopted the last name of Derek after his parents. They saw me as a nice guy and involved me in a lot of their family functions, including me being the best man for Derek's wedding, so this was a way of thanking them as well. I tried dating a bit, but it never worked out for me due to my emotional issues, till I started dating Kim in 2019. She was half Korean and half Italian. I met her at a coffee place where I picked up my coffee and on occasion sat there. She used to work behind the counter. We saw each other only for the order, but once when Derek and I were there and he noticed that she was constantly looking at me, he told me that I should ask her out. I approached a bit hesitant and asked her out for drinks later that day. We had a nice date and she said that she hoped we could see each other again. On my second date with her I told her my background, and to my surprise, she understood and wanted to keep seeing me. At this point I was skeptical, and even cried a bit, because I couldn't believe that I could even find a bit of normalcy restored in my life. We went out for a few dates and really enjoyed each other's company, and it felt that I was finally able to start healing. I went on my first vacation after years with her to Europe and had a great time overall. When 2020 came around, we remained in contact throughout over the phone and FaceTime. When things regained some level of normalcy in the latter half, she asked if she could move in with me and I agreed. She was let go from her coffee shop and was trying her luck with job hunting. She was an amazing cook, and that's when I suggested that maybe she can try and set up a place and get into the food business. By mid-2021, and with the financial backing of her parents, she had a cloud kitchen set up which basically delivered food to the nearby areas. Both our lives were doing great. I still had a lot of emotional issues though. I no longer had thoughts of offing myself, but the nightmares still continued occasionally. Kim announced in February 2023 that she was pregnant, and a range of mixed emotions came over me, from being overjoyed to starting all over again to crying out for the loss of what I once had. I was all over the place. Kim comforted me and we fell asleep in each other's arms. A couple of days later I proposed to her and she was overjoyed. It felt like everything was finally moving to a point where I can have some semblance of peace with my life. We were set to be married, and all the preparations were in full swing for my wedding in mid-June this year.